Beautiful, isn't it? But before we get our N20 powered F30 328i looking the part, we need to get it to be the part. Becoming the ultimate driver's car in all ways is a tall task. It's gonna require a whole lot of high performance parts meant to stiffen, tighten, and boost all of the chassis and engine's best characteristics. And I have just what we need. Cherry picking through our catalog, I've grabbed every single piece this chassis could possibly take, from the suspension and brakes to the engine and cooling system. Partners like Apex, CSF, and 034 Motorsport have also lent their hand directly to help support the F30 chassis. Now, all we need to do is get everything fitted up. So I just want to do a quick inspection of under the car. Missing the entire forward portion of the splash shield. Fender liners are broken. I think on an N20 car, I mean, even the N55 cars, you have this coolant transfer hose that sits on the subframe, which is now completely exposed without the undercar shielding. So kind of important to replace that. However, we're gonna be replacing that plastic shield with that aluminum one, which comes from BMW. So that'll never be a problem again. But fender liners are broken. Now this M Sport bumper was added after the fact. The air ducting isn't even correct for this bumper, so that's going to be fixed. That's both on the brake ducting side as well as the auxiliary cooler. The Sportline cars, which is what this is, would have a cooler on the right side. But when we do the M Sport cooling upgrade, we're going to add also an additional cooler on this right side with all the ducting for that. So all of this is going to be coming off so we can correct that. Front struts, particularly this right one, absolutely blown. Now, you know, we call a strut or any kind of shock absorber a damper because it dampens spring oscillations. But in this case, we can refer to this as a dampener since it's externally dampened. Can't imagine that's doing too much anymore since all the oil clearly is on the outside. This car does have electronic damping control, which is why we're using the B16 Damptronic kit. We want to retain that. Everything is crusty. Steel subframe, very crusty here. However, the engine seems to be pretty clean. Mine is that turbo has some oil on the outside. Looks kind of gross. This is broken. Has this aftermarket exhaust on it, which is going to be coming off. We're going to be replacing it with one that's a little more OEM plus, I guess we'll call it. It's an AWE exhaust. It's decently nice, but we're going to put a European exhaust on it, Ramus. The Diff, it's a crusty one. The subframe looks pretty crusty too, which doesn't matter because we're replacing it. All these control arms on the F30 BMW, I mean, BMW really started cheaping out on a lot of these cars, or the non-M cars, particularly starting with the E90, but like, this is just one piece of steel that's been stamped in a die. I mean, I'm moving the bushing with my hand, so you know these things deflect a ton while you drive. A lot of these modern cars have a lot of these vibration dampers on the subframes and things like that to reduce vibration. However, since we're going to be stiffening up the car quite a bit, we're not going to be putting these back on. And what do you think the odds are, if you ever want to do an alignment on this car, that these eccentric bolts move? I'm going to go with no. We're going to be putting on an M Performance Diff. We're changing the gearing slightly, so we're going up to 323 from 315, and we're using a 215 millimeter ring gear instead of this 188. This drive shaft gebo is looking kind of rough. I'll have to put the transmission in neutral in order to move it over, but we'll unbolt the drive shaft today. We'll remove this exhaust, we'll remove a lot of these under parts. We're going to start stripping this car down. So I think I've seen everything I needed to see. It's not horrible. But you know, it's a car that has 100,000 miles on it and has seen some stuff. I bet you this splash shield probably got ripped off when the front got packed with snow. But we're gonna fix that. I had to start the car because the battery is so weak that I can't just leave it on accessory mode. It shuts itself off. But let's just scan the car real quick. Let's see what kind of fault codes we have. So here we go, wheel speed sensor, drive off recognition, wheel speed sensor, drive off recognition, DSC control unit, vehicle start with vehicle moving or driving condition unknown. No message for rain sensor, no message for this, signal, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, those are all voltage related issues. Not even gonna worry about them. See what it says for engine. That's what I'm most interested in. So for the engine, we got power management, standby current violation, and another one for power management, reduction of or shutdown of individual electrical consumer. We got deactivation of terminal 15, deactivation of terminal 30. Every single fault code on this car is basically related to a voltage or under voltage problem. I'm going to look at the condition-based services. So every single time you reset a service counter in this car, whether it be brake pads, oil change, brake fluid change, anything like that, it actually records how many times those things were done. I'm curious to, and that's assuming you did a reset. I'm curious to see how many times the oil's been changed in this car. Ooh, love to see it. So the oil has been changed 16 times in this car. At least that's how many times the service counter has been reset. But you figure 103,000 miles for the oil to have been changed 16 times. This should be a pretty clean engine. We're gonna find that out when we pull the valve cover on it. It's had the brakes done 3 times in the front, 4 times in the rear. Brake fluid's been changed 4 times. That could be better. Vehicle check's been done 2 times, and then the rest of these condition-based services don't matter. But that's hopeful. Got a lot of work to do. Regardless of the fact of what it looks like underneath, we're replacing the front subframe, rear subframe, all the suspension components. So anything underneath the car that looks like poo is gonna be thrown in the trash anyway. I'm gonna start removing all the broken parts on the car first, start stripping this thing down, and get it to a point where we can start working the engine bay. We'll drain the coolant, remove the radiator, intercooler, all that stuff. We're replacing it all. So let's get into it. As with any build, you need to start a trash pile. We're gonna put that right there. We're gonna see what we have at the end of the day. That looks kind of rough. We'll put this in the maybe pile. It's worth mentioning, especially on a long-term build, or if you're gonna be doing something over a long period of time, if you take fasteners out of like parts of the car like this, you either label them or just thread them back into the position they belong in. I don't care if this exhaust clamp breaks or if it unthreads. I need it to break or unthread, either or. Looks pretty gross. Here we go.
Even with the laundry list I had to do, the beginning of this teardown showed me glimpses of hope that this car could live up to the SI badge namesake I had my sights set on. While there's still plenty to remove, rebuild, and upgrade, there's no doubt this build will set a new bar for what can be done with the F30 platform.
This exhaust is pretty light. You would not be able to do this with a factory exhaust. 0 chance. This kind of goes in line with what I was saying before about swapping parts over that you need to reuse. This is the exhaust flap actuator for the factory muffler. Does need to stay plugged in, otherwise you'll have a fault code. Most of your aftermarket exhaust systems don't utilize the flap, but they do provide you a mounting bracket on the exhaust for the actuator. So I'm just swapping this over now. That way it's together. I also just want to get the hangers off the other exhaust too. I'll plop those on. That way I can kind of keep track. The hanger that goes to the transmission cross member, the one that has a broken bolt stuck up inside, I'm just going to leave that hanging for now. And as I'm going through this project, I'm making notes. I'm writing stuff down that I need to buy. For example, there were little plastic nuts that sit here, or plastic body nuts. That's for that little cross brace that went on the subframe. I tried to remove them, but every single one of them broke, so need to replace them. So it's really good to write down notes so that as you're going through a project, any project, of things that you might need to order that you just don't have casually laying around or that you can't reuse. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this series so far. Just a quick reminder to let you know that all the parts we installed on Project F30 320 SI are available at fcpeuro.com, including all of the maintenance needs, performance upgrades, and all of the other necessary stuff you might need, including antifreeze. Just topping off right now. So with that said, we're gonna get back into the video and pick up from where we left off. Next up, I'm gonna take the drive shaft out. It's gonna have to be removed, at least from the rear differential, to install the new diff along with the rear subframe. So I'm just gonna remove it entirely from the equation. Also, I'm antsy to do this because I want to confirm it should, but I want to make sure that the drive shaft will bolt up to the new differential. And we got some plastic nuts, also 10mm. On the 8 HP transmission, to mechanically override the transmission and put it in neutral, you have to thread this 5mm Allen to release the parking pawl. So if the car is being towed or it won't start and you need to be able to move it, just thread this 5mm in. And on any of these cars, it will scream at you like a banshee that the car is not in park. It'll warn you that the car might roll away or it can't go into park. You'll have like 18 warnings. It's a little ridiculous, but that's how you do it. Normally you'd be able to pull this drive shaft out by unbolting it from the gebo and leaving the pinion flange in the differential. However, I'm going to be removing this pinion nut, so there's a procedure for that. I'm going to leave that together and I'm going to go ahead and test fit it on the new differential. That nut is a standard size, so that input flange should fit no problem. And the differential that we're going to install is a M Performance limited slip differential for a 335 manual transmission car. So it's the bigger 215mm ring and, or pinion diff. Seeing as this car is going to make more than stock 335i power and torque, I thought it made sense to run the larger differential. Also, the bump from 315 to 323 is not huge, but you know, it's going to be geared a little bit more for acceleration, which is also kind of a benefit. Okay, moment of truth. Will that slip into the other drive shaft? I'm sure it will. Oh yeah. The drive shaft will insert into the bigger diff, and also the center section here, right where the center support is, it's collapsible. So if the drive shaft ends up being just a little bit shorter because this differential pokes out a little bit further forward, we do have plenty of adjustment or plenty of room here on the spline portion of the drive shaft. And actually, I just noticed something. This is probably something we'll have to address. There's a boot right here, and it's torn. So I might need to end up doing a center support bearing on this and replacing that boot, because dirt and debris can get in there and it might seize up this drive shaft. Well, that's fun. I didn't want to do that, but just figure that out. Yay. So, like we discussed, all of the ducting is incorrect behind this bumper. Somebody just took an M Sport bumper, slapped it over the Sport line packaging behind there, and all of that's wrong. This is broken. It all needs to come out. Also, the headlights are kind of dirty, so I want to take the headlights off as well, because it's going to be a really good time to give them a polish and clean them off and you know, renew them. But we'll talk about bumper removal on an F30. We have several T30s that run across the top here. We have T25s here that go into the headlight. And then also, once everything is detached underneath, including the fender liners and all those parts, you'll have two 8mm here that secure the bumper to the fender. So fairly straightforward. On this car, we do have some connectors for the PDC as well as for the fog lights. So there's like a main harness that needs to be unplugged. However, like I said, all this ducting back here is not the correct ducting for this car. So all of this is going to come out. Brake ducts. We have our one auxiliary radiator here on the right side, but we'll also be installing one here on the left side. So you also have to install all the bracketry for that, which we already have. So, you know what I was saying earlier about this project car being different is a lot of people don't really look at an F30 328 as something that could be a really balanced, well-performing car. And one thing I want you to look at is front of the engine is here, and it's pretty much entirely behind the front shock tower, so it's more or less a front midship car, and there's so much room in the front that BMW literally just has this giant airbox sitting in front of the engine because there's all this space. You've got the radiator fan out. I'm gonna go ahead and drain coolant from the lowest point in the cooling system, which is the auxiliary radiator. Remove the air box, just generally getting all the stuff out of the way that needs to be out of the way in the engine bay, and just sort of peeling this thing back like an onion, layer by layer. This is the lowest point on this cooling system. If you did not have an auxiliary radiator, your lowest point would be at the water pump. Now, I'm always generally very cautious with these connections because you don't want to damage them. It's very easy to break them. In this case, everything's being replaced, including the cooler, with a new one. Let's start removing some of the coolant hoses. We can pretty much just remove a bunch of them at this point. Not much coolant came out, so I know that it's hiding somewhere in the rest of the system. I'm sure it'll splash out when it feels like it. So I'm gonna be kind of methodical about what hoses I disconnect and how I disconnect them, because I don't want to be caught off guard and drop a bunch of coolant on the floor, because I'm gonna have to go ahead and clean the floor so you don't track coolant through the rest of the shop space and make a bigger mess. Trying to work clean. This is honestly one of the worst cooling systems, I think, to open up. I've done minor cooling system work on another one of these many years ago when we were doing an F30 series of videos on the N20, and every one of these hoses I feel is like just a coolant time bomb waiting for you. You don't really know which one is going to be it. Every hose is just a little bit more. When you thought you can't quite possibly have any more, where could it be coming from? There's more. For those of you who are familiar with this coolant hose right here to the cylinder head, it is popularly known as the Mickey Mouse flange, and it is a liability in any car that has it. Reason being is the plastic degrades, and then especially if you have an oil filter housing leak, the oil messes with the plastic and then it becomes very brittle. This appears to be original. So with that said, I am going to predict that this part breaks upon removal. Now, 103,000 miles on this car, allegedly original. Yeah, I am gonna call it that this is gonna break. Hey, Hidalgo, Mickey Mouse flange, do you think this comes out in one piece or do you think it breaks?
I think it's gonna come out in one piece.
Ooh.
Whoa.
Hey, Hidalgo, you win. Came out in one piece. That actually might be one of the best conditioned Mickey Mouse flanges I've seen. Normally these things they look more like this, or that brownish color, and the plastic just straight up falls apart. So right now I'm working on getting the valve cover off, and to do that I need to get the high pressure fuel pump and fuel rail and feed line out of the way, so taking care of that now. And there is residual fuel in this stuff, so just be careful. Car's been sitting for a day, so there's not really any pressure in the system. But if you've just driven the car, be aware. So this is a plug kit from BMW for working on high pressure fuel injection systems. In our case, this is going to be open for quite a while we're doing work on the engine and the rest of the car, particularly for the injectors, because those are in the engine bay. We're pulling the valve cover off. There's a bunch of dust, and you can try to be as clean as you want and sterilize everything and remove all the dust, but the reality is high pressure fuel injection systems and direct injection systems in general are very sensitive to contamination. So it's always a good idea to cap off fuel injectors, feed rails, fuel rails, anything like that, just to ensure you don't risk getting dirt, debris, anything into the injectors or the high pressure fuel rail or anything like that. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and remove the high pressure fuel pump. It sits directly on top of the valve cover. There is some spring tension on this because it's driven by the camshaft with a follower. And I'm just gonna slowly turn each of the mounting screws a little bit at a time. I don't want this coming out sideways. This high pressure fuel pump is still good, so I'm gonna be reusing it. There's no need to replace it. So about ready to pull the valve cover off. This car allegedly has had 16 oil changes in its entire life based on the condition-based services. We're about to determine whether that's truthful or a lie. That is actually not bad. That's very clean, actually. This valve cover's trash. We'll go ahead and throw that over there in the rest of the pile. Oh, there we go. So yeah, N20s have phenolic throttle bodies, plastic. But it's a Valvetronic engine, so throttle body's always open, pending Valvetronic works. The only time the throttle body will do anything in terms of throttle control is if there's an issue with the Valvetronic system and it has to operate in a backup mode. I am kind of curious though. Oh. We're doing a timing chain. We're doing the thing that I didn't want to do. So 3 things we learned so far. This engine needs a timing service. We have a 2-part series on how to do that. So if you want to know how to do it with one of these engines, we got you covered on that front. While this intake manifold does not appear to be carboned up, we're gonna replace it anyway. We already took it off and we have the replacement on hand. I just need to swap over some parts from this intake manifold to the new one. And also, while the intake valves do look pretty clean, now's the perfect time to carbon clean them. We're gonna do that as well. Stripped almost everything off the engine yesterday. We still need to do the oil filter housing and the oil filter housing gasket, that's fine. But we're gonna do the timing chain today. So we need to start off by doing the classic N20 timing chain repair. First and foremost, we're gonna make sure the engine's top dead center. That's where we start this saga of fun. This is the jig to align the reluctor rings for the cam. So those need to plop in, and then you lock this in place, and then you torque down the center bolt. But when you're taking it apart, it doesn't matter. So, looks like the TDC pin might be bent, but I want to go ahead and get the access plug off the backside here, off the engine block, and just be able to slide this thing in to at least make sure that it is in fact that TDC, because that pin should drop in. And then from there, I'll be able to lock the flex plate for the transmission. And then once the flex plate is locked, we'll go ahead and start loosening some timing components. A common question that a lot of people typically ask when you're doing a timing job. You know, timing tools are expensive. Sometimes you can rent them. But the fact of the matter is, no matter what you're working on, you have to have these types of tools to do these jobs. You know, older engines, you know, if you have like an engine with timing belts or something, like, you know, some engines are simple, you don't need them. But there are certain applications where if you were to try to do this work without it, you would not be able to, and it's just really that simple. Yeah, so bottom side of our engine is also very clean. Normally, if you had a vehicle that never received oil changes, you'd see a lot of varnish here on the balance shaft assembly. And that's what this is. This is both the balance shaft drive and oil pump drive. So balance shaft portion, oil pump portion, and if we look here at the oil pan, this thing is basically wide open. The only work I would say that they did was they added this little windage piece here that helps guide oil from the oil return from the turbo back to the sump. But there is literally nothing in there to prevent oil from sloshing forward while braking, which is why we have an oil pan baffle that we designed in-house before we ever started filming this that should be here today. At this point, I'm gonna go ahead and start getting the engine ready to do the timing service. Need to get the engine top dead center, put the cam lock tools on, put our balance shaft lock in place. We can start ripping all this stuff out. But this will be the easiest timing job you ever do in an N20 because there's literally nothing in your way right now. And right now the engine is just hanging by a moment here with you. Something, 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 something. That right there is what keeps timing on your N20, N52, N54, N55, S55 engines. Pretty much one central bolt, one big bolt torqued to a whole lot. Which is why you hear about sometimes these engines slipping or slipping time. There's a crank sprocket, and we already now know that this is the old timing chain design because it has this wave washer on it. So it's a good thing that we're doing this because this old design is susceptible to slipping. So we're gonna be updating that. Ta-da! Just fell apart. Sorry. I'm not putting that back together. Yeah, so that's out. Now we need to get our oil pump drive out. So I'm gonna raise the car up, that's below. But again, we got a 2-part series on how to do this. We're not gonna get into the details of it. I am gonna compare the new chain to the old chain just to see how elongated it is, but we're gonna show you that update on the sprockets and the friction interface between them, because that was one of the major updates when they changed these components over. This car is 9 of 2014 production, so it's sort of out there in terms of production on the N20s, but clearly this still has the old stuff in it. So let's talk about the update on these parts, because this is something a lot of people ask, and the most definitive explanation I give you on an update here is if you look at the old oil pump tensioning module and you look at the sprocket, that is a smooth face there, as opposed to the new sprocket, which has this laser etching and engraving. So that is a friction surface. We can go ahead and throw that in the trash. Now this is the main timing chain sprocket. These both look the same from this side. This side faces the engine, but look at the front. We now have that same laser etched surface where this one doesn't. Now I mentioned when I pulled the crank snout out, it had that wave washer on it. That wave washer is not to be installed on any automatic transmission car. They say to keep it on the manuals, but I would caution against that strictly because what we're trying to do here with the new parts, and the best way to explain this, the sprocket sits on there like that, with obviously your main timing chain going to the cams. The snout itself, that sits in there like that, and then these all get sandwiched together with the big bolt. So you have all of these surfaces which have the laser etching on it, so it's basically smooth surface, laser etch, smooth surface, laser etch. And then the bolt clamps that whole thing down, and then hopefully it doesn't spin when you're making big power with your N20. So this is why it's worth doing this update.
While the timing chain revamp may not be the sexiest upgrade I've ever done, it's very much a necessary evil when it comes to the N20, especially when adding power above stock, improving reliability and opening up a world where power could be added without the fear of jumping time or complete failure, and removing many other systems and pieces that I'm already looking to upgrade made this job a little bit simpler. With this job complete, I can start focusing on the more exciting pieces that are going to help complete our vision of what a 328 SI would have looked like from the factory.